Sometimes I am not very nice. At different times, I've had coworkers lose their driving privileges for extended periods of time, and I was much less than sympathetic. I had to struggle with 12-hour shift scheduling so they could carpool to get to work, and I did not like it. Or perhaps I read of a rich and famous adulterer who loses everything in divorce court. That can generate a smug, serves you right sort of response. Similarly, as an oldest child, it was sometimes my assigned task to keep my younger siblings out of trouble, when seeing them get into trouble was really what I wanted. Well, perhaps when traveling, you see a total stranger putting themselves in danger, maybe climbing over a cliffside fence to get a better angle or posing close to a wild animal, get that spectacular photo or selfie. Do I attempt to intervene to prevent harm, or do I ignore them, assuming they're not going to listen anyway? Or in my workplace roles as an industrial superintendent, a safety and health coordinator, or a fire chief, all of which I had at different times, it was often my task to prescribe personal protective equipment, to develop procedures, and I was often the one instructing the workers and their supervisors, or the one charged with giving correction after they had failed to follow previous instruction. In such situations, "I told you so" was hard to suppress. This was strongest with those who wanted to do their things their own way. The prophet Jonah may have struggled with things like these. He was a prophet of God from a town in Israel when Israel was a separate kingdom from Judah. As a prophet, Jonah was likely educated in the law and in the use of poetic language. He may have been a part of the prophetic group or the prophetic school at Bethel that's described in 2 Kings 2. But he was a good news prophet to King Jeroboam the second one, telling him of God's support for his military campaign to restore Israel, which was successful, to expand Israel to its greatest political extent. You can read about that in 2 Kings 14:25. But there came a time when Jonah was given a prophet of God's more usual task with telling people of God's judgment. Jonah receives an urgent command from God. Arise, go, announce judgment against that great city of Nineveh. God tells Jonah that the wickedness in that great city of Nineveh has come to his attention. Why then? How did that happen? God knows all. Nineveh had long been a center for the worship of the goddess Ishtar, involving sexual immorality and violence. So the wickedness was not a new thing. What changed? Was there a righteous person in Nineveh praying? An angelic report? The text is silent. So Jonah arose, but he walked 50 kilometers southwest, downhill, to the port city of Joppa, which was the seaport used to bring in materials for building the temple in Jerusalem, instead of hundreds of kilometers uphill, north and east by caravan to Nineveh. He found a merchant ship there in Joppa, likely a Phoenician one, headed as far west as possible, and paying his fare, fled from God's call. The ship was likely a coastal vessel, maybe 15 meters long, 4 meters wide, with rounded sides and runners along the bottom so it could be pulled up on a beach. This was something sailors did at that time at nightfall or when the weather was too bad for them to travel. It had a deck under which there was shelter for the crew to rest and space for cargo. It had a mast with a crow's nest up on top so that the sailors could see the shore by which they navigated. Maybe it had a sail. Some did, some didn't. The cargo was in pieces or containers which a man could lift and carry. It was rowed by sailors standing on top of the deck. God was not happy with Jonah. He hurled a great wind against the ship. There was no warning to seek the safety of a beach, so this was not good for the ship or for those on it. Their sails, if they had them, only worked well if the wind was behind them. So with the wind against them, all the sailors could do was row. The ship was in danger of breaking up. That's what the text tells us. So they did everything they could to preserve the ship and their lives. They hurled their precious cargo off the ship. They cried out to their gods, and they rowed desperately. It's almost like God was trying to blow them back to where they came from. Jonah, however, was below the deck, sleeping. How did he do that? The captain didn't understand either and woke Jonah up and demanding, "You cry out to your God so that we can preserve our lives." In further desperation, the sailors cast lots, convinced someone on the ship had brought the calamity upon them. Jonah draws the proverbial short straw and admits he is the cause. And when questioned, acknowledges that he worships the God of all gods, the creator that made land and sea. Well, this made the sailors even more terrified because they understand that their lesser gods are powerless against the creator of all. They plead with him, begging him to tell them how to survive the storm. And he tells them they must hurl him into the sea. They do not want to incur the wrath of the Creator by killing his servant, but eventually do obey the instruction given through the prophet, pleading to the Lord for mercy, which is actually given, because after they do this, the storm abates. Whether or not Jonah was willing it or intending it, God shows mercy to these Gentile, pagan God-worshiping sailors in response to their obedience and their appeal. As a result, they come to fear and worship the Lord. So, meanwhile, Jonah's thrown into the sea. The waves are tumultuous, the water feels cold, and it is unlikely he knows how to swim. We are not told how long he struggled in the sea, nor how far he was carried by wind and current from the ship or any of its maybe still floating cargo. We are told that a great sea creature is sent by God to swallow Jonah whole. No biting, no chewing, nor even digestion is allowed. I don't think Jonah has any idea what it is that he swallowed him. He couldn't see. Matter of fact, could he see any light at all? Could he hear the water pass by or the heartbeat of the creature? Could he feel the texture of the insides of the creature or the other things it had swallowed? And what did all this smell like? Did he have any idea really where he was, at least at the time? Perhaps he came to understand that later. The text has him there for 3 days and 3 nights and aware of where he was. Was that a prophet's metaphor for death or literal awareness or later calculation? We don't know. How long was he conscious? We don't know that either. No matter how we understand it, however, Jonah's experience was of a miracle wrought by the God that he served. He believed his life was about to end, and he calls out to the Lord in prayer and was aware that his prayer was heard and answered. But the prayer is odd. A psalm, really. Let's read it. I called out to the Lord from my distress, and he answered me. From the belly of Sheol I cried out for help, and you heard my prayer. You threw me into deep waters, into the middle of the sea. The ocean current engulfed me. The mighty waves you swept over me. I thought I had been banished from your sight, that I would never again see your holy temple. Water engulfed me up to my neck. The deep ocean surrounded me. Seaweed wrapped around my head. I went down to the very bottoms of the mountains, to the gates of the netherworld barred me in forever. But you brought me out from the pit, O Lord my God. When my life was ebbing away, I called out to the Lord, and my prayer came to you, to your holy temple. Those who worship worthless idols forfeit the mercy that could be theirs. But as for me, I promise to offer a sacrifice to you with public declaration of praise. I will surely do what I have promised. Salvation belongs to the Lord. In that prayer, he acknowledges he is there by God's will, that he is about to join the dead. And yet, he believes that rescue is possible, declaring his determination to publicly offer sacrifice and praise to God. He also states his belief that those who worship idols are not eligible for God's mercy, perhaps unwilling to acknowledge or unaware of God's mercy given to the sailors and their response to God because of God's compassion on them. What an odd Thanksgiving psalm. He states awareness of God's displeasure with them, but offers no confession of specific disobedience, no settling of accounts, no promise to obedience. He clings to and restates his belief that idol worshippers like the sailors and the Ninevites are not eligible for the mercy of God. Perhaps this is a retrospective from a rescued survivor, a prayer of thanksgiving from the undeserved prophet who, though rightfully condemned, received God's mercy. Final rescue comes when God commands the sea creature to vomit or hurl Jonah onto dry land. And that's the only way that maybe he knew what the sea creature was, because maybe the sea creature gave its life in order to do that. I don't know. Again, the text is silent. So, sometime after, and we're not given any idea how long, Jonah is given the command, go, preach to the people of Nineveh again. This time, he walks several hundred kilometers north and east to the city of Nineveh, probably joining a trading caravan traveling from Egypt to Nineveh. Oh, and by the way, it's also several hundred meters uphill. Once there, he begins to proclaim God's judgment, that it is coming in 40 days. Does it make any sense that in the text, there's no mention of what they were doing wrong or what they needed to do instead? Again, the text is silent, implying that, at least in God's eyes, these are distracting and unnecessary details. Yet, after just one day of his anticipated 3-day preaching tour, the Ninevites do respond. They believed Jonah was the prophet from God, delivering a warning from the Creator God. They assumed there was no possibility of hiding from God's judgment. They fasted. They repented in sackcloth, both rich and poor, powerful and powerless. The edict from the king and the nobles demanded repenting of evil ways and even included the animals in the citywide fasting. They hoped, without any promise or other knowledge that the text reveals, that God would see and change his mind. God does see their sincere repentance and their hope for deliverance, and God abandons his judgment. Mercy and forgiveness are undeserved. Appealing to God's grace and love by action and word is effective. Jonah complains to God, "Oh Lord, this is Just what I thought would happen when I was in my own country. This is what I tried to prevent by attempting to escape to Tarshish, because I knew that you are gracious and compassionate, slow to anger and abounding in mercy, the one who relents concerning threatened judgment. So now, Lord, kill me instead, because I would rather die than live. He was angry that the wicked people in the wicked city would not be destroyed. He was angry that the character God revealed when he passed by and announced his name to Moses on Sinai in Exodus 34, 6 and 7 was true for Ninevites as well as Israelites, for Gentiles as well as Jews, for the sailors as well as Jonah. And God asked, "Are you really so very angry?" So Jonah decided to watch from outside the city. And I wonder if he was hoping that the Ninevites would not be willing to sustain their repentance, return to their wicked ways, and be destroyed like Sodom and Gomorrah after all. As he waited, God set a plant to provide a little extra shade and ease Jonah's misery, to Jonah's great joy. Then the next day, God sent a worm to destroy the plant, so that the sun was on Jonah's head, and then God sent a hot wind so that Jonah suffered in the heat. Jonah was angry over the plant, despaired of life, preferring to die. And God asked, "Are you really so very angry about the plant?" Jonah replied emphatically, "I am so angry, life is not worth living." And the Lord said, "You are upset about this little plant, something for which you did not work, nor you did anything to make it grow. It grew up overnight and died the next day. Should I, God, not be even more concerned that Nineveh, this enormous city, that there are more than 120,000 people in it who do not know right from wrong, as well as many animals? Mercy and forgiveness are undeserved. Appealing to God's grace and love by action and word is effective. If Peter was like Jonah, first saying an emphatic no to God in response to the vision of ceremonial unclean animals and God's command to slaughter and to eat, then receiving God's declaration in Acts 10:15, "What God has made clean, you must not consider ritually unclean." Then perhaps a Gentile like Cornelius, the Roman centurion in Acts 10, may be like the one who brought the wickedness of the Ninevites to God's attention. Perhaps Nineveh like the world beyond Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria, the all nations Jesus cares for, sending his followers among them to make disciples in the Great Commission, Matthew 28:19. This leads me to remember that in Ezekiel 18:32, it says God takes no pleasure in anyone's death. In 2 Peter 3:9, it says God does not desire that any should perish. And in Matthew 24:14, Jesus says he will not return to execute final judgment until the gospel is preached throughout the whole inhabited world. Mercy and forgiveness are undeserved. Appealing to God's grace and love by action and word is effective.